How is this video would probably really belong on either Open Source Occult TV or Beyond Room 313, and I should have really put this up as a vlog on open source, but I wanted this to reach as many people as possible because it's an important topic of discussion. Now, it will be fleshed out into a professional video made with details and facts and references on Beyond 313, but I want to get this out now because it's kind of an important thing to think of. I'm pretty convinced of this, and I didn't invent this theory, of course. It's been knocking around for a bit. But, I've been a great admirer of Carl Jung's work over the years, over the decades. And his constant reference to the Germanic god Wotan as the Krist of the Germanic people always kind of stuck with me. He never really fleshed it out or elaborated it in terms of any kind of theory. And anyone who did tended to be connected to sort of like the Ariosophy and the sort of Teutonic kind of bloodline religions of the Germanic world. People like Carl Maria Wilgut. I made a film about him on Beyond Room 313. I'll put the link below. And it's tainted, this association with the likes of the SS and the Nazis has tainted what is a profound realization that very possibly all you Christians out there who are worshipping a figure called Jesus Christ may actually be worshipping the Germanic Nordic god of Wotan or Odin, that's been rebranded as a kind of a westernized rabbi in order to make Christianity stick in Europe. Now, let me explain further, okay? Christianity did not just enter into Europe and take it over with the existing canon, dogma, orthodoxy, rules and everything that came out of Second Temple Rabbinical Judaism from the Middle East. The early days of Christianity, we are told, is a story of persecution of Christians by the likes of Nero in the AD 40s. When you start to examine the real facts, that they never happened at all. If any Christians were persecuted, it was particular groups or elements of them who started trouble. For instance, Nero. Now, when I'm saying Christians, these first ones were completely 100% Jewish. There was nothing Christian about them. They were Jewish radicals. Now, that had broken away from mainstream Judaism in Judea and in Roman Judea, with the notion of overthrowing the Roman Empire, at least in that part of the world, and they actually did it very successfully on a global level, on a Roman Empire level, imperial level, eventually. Now, these were considered nutcases even by mainstream Judaism at the time. Hence the rows in between the rabbis in the synagogue in Jerusalem and the characters like Jesus Christ and his travelling gang of Rocky, Petra, the Knife, Judas Iscariot, and the other zealots he surrounded themselves with. At the time, the word Messiah in Judaism had a very strange meaning. It could mean that anyone could call themselves a Messiah. And there was actually 30 or so Messiahs operating in Jerusalem at that time, according to Catherine Nixie's The Darkening Age. Now, the Darkening Age also shows us that the history of early Christianity was not Christians being persecuted by pagans. It was basically Second Temple Rabbinical Jews going insane, attacking pagans. That's really what it was. And I start with the Temple of Palmyra, and these radical offshoot Jewish breakaway sects of zealots just killed everything in sight that they deemed to be evil. One of the things they were completely obsessed with was the idea of idols. Now, this directly comes from the Jewish Talmud. smashing out idols. This goes right back to Exodus, that their belief that there were demons inside statues and accurate reconstructions of the human figure or form. And that's why they smashed all the noses off them and smashed their heads and so on. Now, these early Christians infiltrated the Roman Empire, and many of them they were highly disenfranchised even by their own communities. They were a radical Jewish sect. Eventually made their way to Rome and tried to start. They probably, almost certainly, were involved in that mass arson of the city in order to try and start a revolt in Rome. And that's the reason why Nero persecuted them. Nero punished them for starting a riot. And we got these stories of Christians being thrown to the lions and all this. It was really, and how the Christians were persecuted and all this stuff. Now, the reason why they invented this persecution story, they were no more persecuted than any other group in the Roman Empire. The pagan Romans were incredibly tolerant of all religions, once you didn't start a war. And they made the mistake of starting a war. And that's why the temple in Jerusalem was demolished and so on. We had things like Masada. Now, this legacy of persecution is fascinating, because if you look at as the first century came along, the second century came along, AD now, third century, you had a growth of Judaism in the early Roman Empire in the classical world. And they would have a situation, basically it was a situation of Jews lobbying for tolerance and understanding of the classical pagan structures of Rome, saying, please be liberal, please look after our religion, don't persecute us. And they were given it. They were given legal representation. But as soon as the Christians got into power, they turned it around and started attacking and destroying the pagan Roman Empire from within. And you've all seen the movie Agora, Hypatia, what was done there, the Library of Alexandria. Christians to this day do not want to admit. You go into any group and say, "Oh, I'm so sad that the Library of Alexandria was destroyed. What the books I would have had." And then you turn around to some American and you say to them, "The Library of Alexandria was destroyed by Christians, and Hypatia was a pagan." That's not true at all. They don't want to accept the dark side of the Christianity thing. Now, it's all love and light and, love thy enemy and all this stuff. And if you saw what was done to Hypatia, you'd be sickened. Early Christianity was ISIS on steroids. That's why it became so powerful, through sheer force. And also, they would influence and influence and take over wealthy Romans who became sort of fashionable Christians in the same way wealthy people become Scientologists today. Now, this is all leading to the Odin thing. I'm just giving you the early history of Christianity leading up to this. Now, and I'm not making this up, it's all there for you to read. It's just that Christians hide the truth of their start of their religion. They don't even want to accept that they're Jewish. And this is why I pushed the folk Catholicism thing, and I'll explain why. Now, the Christians, i.e. Second Temple Rabbinical Jews, had basically taken over the Roman Empire when Constantine the Great, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, claimed to have saw a symbol in the sky, and the whole thing by this sign conquer. So, and it was the pyro, which is the kind of P and an X, which is not a Christian symbol. That's been found in Neolithic caves. That's a symbol like the five-pointed star or a triple spiral. It's because that's been found in Neolithic artwork, that shape, 5,000 years ago, maybe even older, 6,000 years ago. And that became the symbol of the Vatican. And when the Roman Empire transferred over, now the reason why the Roman Empire became Christian was a combination of growth among the wealthy, like the Scientologists here nowadays. Like all the wealthy and the elites now become Scientologists. All the wealthy and the establishment figures in Rome all became Christians. Many became Christians. And Constantine realized, after he'd boiled his wife alive in the bathtub, that Christians would be very good soldiers in the Roman army, because they are not afraid of death. They think they're going to meet their maker, and therefore they would be the same tactic that Hitler used with Muslims in the Wehrmacht. They were not afraid of dying, so they make great soldiers. And And so that's how eventually from that point on, the transformation of what we call Second Temple Rabbinical Judaism into Catholicism began. And it ended the Roman Empire. First it split it in two, and that was the end of that. I mean, Roman Empire was destroyed, and it was reduced to something that it was knocked back 1,000 years technologically by the Christians. On the eve, before Christians arrived in Rome, Romans were developing the steam engine. There was engineers were even talking about if we put wheels on this, maybe we can use it as a kind of a transport. And this is what, how many years? Like 16, 17, 1800 years before Stevenson. And if they had to develop steam locomotion in the Roman Empire, coupled with their engineering from the aqueducts, they probably had to put rockets on the moon by the Renaissance. But that's all, here or there. But anyway, that's just to emphasize the catastrophic disaster that Christianity was upon the Roman Empire. The cities fell apart, the sewerage systems broke down, and they gave us the cities of the Middle Ages, which were filthy, dirty hellholes. They replaced the advanced systems of medicine with prayer and rosary beads and things like that. Okay. That had worked in an empire falling into chaos. This is not unusual. Strange religions usually happen, and there was also other factors too, like the Manibus debt cult that grew up in Rome as well, that began to basically worship debt and dead ancestors, which, interesting enough, in Cosmism, the Soviet kind of, they call it philosophy, but it's kind of a religion for communists, there's the worship of dead ancestors too. So it's basically entrenched within the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean. Christianity is basically a bit of Egypt, a bit of North Africa, a bit of Turkey, bits of the Middle East, Greece, Turkey, Rome, Armenia, that part of the world. Basically an Eastern Mediterranean warm, sunny religion for people from warm, sunny. Because of its evangelical nature and this concept of having to spread the religion in the same way the Roman Empire had to spread, they needed missionaries and so on. But the biggest prize of all would have been Northern and Western Europe, the Germanic and the Celtic world. And this is how, I know I've always known this, this is how things, Germanic and Celtic festivals, such as Halloween, Easter and so on, were winter solstice were dovetailed into Christianity and became Christian festivals. So they moved the birth of Jesus to Ostara, the festival of fertility of the Germanic goddess, and they moved the death of Jesus to Ostara, and the resurrection and the birth, which it makes think, because that's what that is. Ostara is the return to spring festival, so the Jesus death and resurrection thing fitted perfectly into that. And then Christmas, the winter solstice, pagans, Celtic pagans. And this is why all the early missionaries in the Odinval, the Odin wood, this is why another thing I couldn't understand is why were all these Anglo-Saxon missionaries in the heartland of Nordic paganism. It was because they were rebuilding a new Christianity. So what happened was, up until about 1000 AD, the symbol of the crucifix was barely used by Christians. The early symbol, now that Christians will tell you that they found documentation about the 2nd century AD that proves that Christians used the cross. No, it's a mention of certain symbols used by Christians, but it doesn't actually specifically say it's the crucifix. It wasn't used until the Middle Ages, or sorry, the what we call now the early, for the very earliest, the early Middle Ages. It was the symbol of the fish. Now that Christians will tell you, they had to be driven underground, and the symbol of the fish was a secret code that Christians used to avoid persecution. No, the Christians at the highest level of the Roman Empire were using that symbol. It was not a secret symbol, it was used just like the all-seeing eye in Freemasonry. It was the symbol of Christianity. It was the symbol of Christianity. Basically, it came out of, it was adopted in the times of the Greeks, but it was still a Jewish symbol of Christianity. It was not hidden. It was not a secret code. It was their symbol. Okay. There was no way Christianity was going to penetrate into Northern and Western Europe by pushing a radical rabbi in the Middle East as their central figure of veneration. They had to take an existing religion and dovetail it into Christianity in order to make Christianity work in Northern and Western Europe. So what they did was they took the story of Odin, or Wotan, from the Germanic Nordic mythology, and his story of him hanging from the Yggdrasil tree to achieve enlightenment became the crucifixion and resurrection story of the Christians. Odin is Jesus. This is the most amazing thing when you look into it. You cannot find depictions in early Christianity of anyone on a cross. This explains the Immersal, the crucifix of the Germanic tribes that came into Christianity as a kind of an intermediary between the two, between the tree of life or the Yggdrasil tree and the crucifix of Christianity, was immersed within the Immersal, which the way appears in the Echtensteine, early Christian hermitage in Germany, which I have a video on, an open source occult. I'll put down below. And Jesus Christ is Odin. It just dovetailed into Second Temple Rabbinical Judaism. The story is all there. It wouldn't have worked anyway. Christianity, and that's why they had, for the same reason they had to incorporate Celtic and Germanic pagan festivals into Christianity to make it fly. They also had to literally interject one of their gods, Odin or Wotan, into the most powerful, the god of Europe, into Christianity to make it work. There's been lots of hints of this over the years. For instance, the Cathars didn't believe the crucifixion ever happened. They believed that Jesus Christ did exist and he was a special prophet, but he came to earth to tell us how evil the demon Jehovah, or the demiurge of the Gnostics, was. This was basically Jehovah of the Old Testament is a demon pretending to be God, and this is what both the Gnostics and the Gnostics, the Bogomils, and the Cathars believed about Jesus Christ. That he didn't die on the cross, that he lived as a normal man, but he was a great prophet, and he was basically murdered by the Romans, or in some cases he just vanished completely, and this is where the stories of him ending up in India and so on come from. And this story has persisted, and any group, especially if they had power, like the Cathars, who have a different version of Christianity than what the Vatican had, they were exterminated in the most brutal and horrific manner. It's just as bad as how they exterminated pagans right up to the Prussian and Karelian Crusades, the Third Swedish Crusade, to wipe out the pagans of Eastern Europe, the Baltic region, and the last of the Scandinavian pagans. And you can find almost no evidence of the crucifix being used as a Christian symbol until Christianity established itself in Northern Europe, and crosses are everywhere. Christ suffering on the cross, that image is now then pushed to the fore. And what's that? That's Odin. That's Odin. And that's Odin hanging from the Yggdrasil tree, attaining wisdom. And that's what they did. They dovetailed Odin into the Bible and created the Jesus Christ that Christians worship today. So ironically, and of course when I make this film it'll be fleshed out much better with proper examples, this is just a basic introduction. So okay, if you're a Christian and you're of European or European descent, good luck to you. I don't care what religion you worship. But it seems to me that Christians don't seem to understand that they're Jews. They don't seem to understand that, for starters, right? And which you are. I mean, so are Muslims. You're just a different type of Jew, okay? Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that's what you are, okay? And the they're obsessed with the Gospels. Now, the Gospels and the Synoptic Gospels have been rewritten and redrafted in the same way that Christian monks rewrote and redrafted the Celtic and the Nordic mythologies in the past to make them sit more comfortably within the Bible. And they did the same with the Synoptic Gospels. I mean, they talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Hag Hammadi nonsense and all this. When you get down to it, there's almost nothing in there that talks about Christianity. It's basically all Judaism in the Middle East, nearly all of it exclusively. That's why the Israelis hold that in such high regard, because that's that's basically their ancient history. But in terms of Christians going, all the secrets are in the Nag Hammadi. No, you look at Nag Hammadi, there's nothing in it. And those people who say, oh, it says Jesus was... No, it doesn't say that. You're just making that up because you just heard it from somebody. No, the fact is that if you're a Christian, you're worshipping Odin. It's as simple as that. He's just been rebranded and renamed and given a makeover. But it's the god of the god of Europe still is the most primary god of the world. And that's the reason why. Because it took Christianity... Christianity likes to pretend that it conquered the world by means of having a wonderful story of Jesus. On some levels, yeah. Mostly it did it by the sword. Mostly it did it by the sword and persecution. You were murdered if you didn't become a pagan. As simple as that. That includes all the European pagans. If you didn't become a Christian, that includes the European pagans. And this is why, say people, I have faith in Jesus Christ and all this. What you have really is, and I'm not telling you how to leave your religion or anything, that's your own business. What you really have is faith in an ancient archetype that is central to the Europeans. The god Odin, who sacrificed himself for the benefit of humanity by attaining wisdom and enlightenment. And that's this is why the days of the week were named after... Why do you think the Christians named the days of the week after German gods? Odin, Wednesday; Thursday, Thursday; Friday, Freya. And then the rest are all Saturn, Saturday, pagan gods in Germanic of the classical world, and so on. It just, and the reason why they incorporated Germanic days of the week into it is because they needed to Germanize Christianity in order to make it work. It's as simple as that. You're worshipping Odin. That's the end of it. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it's the values that you feel as a Christian regarding, tolerance and love thy neighbour, and you want to go for all that stuff. That's all still there. That was there in the Germanic religions, but they just try to portray everything in the past before that as being barbaric and horrible. And you can see even how they've rewritten the Irish mythology, like the story of Setanta and the Hound of Cullen is basically David and Goliath. And we don't know the real story there, but, they tell us that the Parthenons were the daughters of Noah and stuff like that. More nonsense. You have to work through, James Joyce said that history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to wake. I would say it's a nightmare from which you're trying to wake, but it's also a gigantic jigsaw puzzle with 4 or 5 jigsaw puzzles mixed in there, and you've only got one picture on the box, and the picture on the box is the Christianity you're handed in the West today. But in there is a puzzle of how Odin was stuck in there, how Germanic and classical pagan gods and feast days were stuck in there. And I'm not making this up. It's all there in black and white, and you can see it. You have all these theologians. For instance, the classic example is that Christianity is far more tolerant towards women than either Islam or Orthodox Judaism. Where did that come from? That came from European paganism, where we had goddesses as well as gods, and so on. And that's where, Odin had a wife. And the gods of the Nordic world are very accessible. As does the Celtic world, they're very accessible. And they're very human in many ways. And that's the whole reason why Jesus is portrayed in a kind of a humanistic term. And even, I wonder about the story of the carpenter. Jesus with his hammer, is that dovetailing Thor into it? Or even the Celtic god of the builders, the Gobanseir, or the Gobanu, which became a kind of a mix-over thing as well, of a Christian who built churches compared to an ancient smith or builder of the pagan Ireland. So, you can hold. I'm not saying to you, you walk away from Christianity. I'm saying to you, walk away from. No, those. If that gives you faith, that's a beautiful thing. If that gives you the thing to move on, it's a beautiful thing. But the reason why I'm doing this is to try to explain to you that, like, you can't sit there and call pagans or Hindus heathens, or the Muslims call us infidels because we're not people of the books. People of the books are Christians, Jews, and Muslims. The rest of us are all dogs to that, outside that system. And you don't have to feel that you've somehow been let down by Christ being Odin. You can just continue to worship it as it was. It's still the same power force and it's still the same archetype at the basic level. But as a pagan, it only proves to me the spectacular endurance of the pagan path, be it classical paganism, Celtic paganism, Germanic, Nordic paganism, Hinduism, Slavic paganism, Tengism of the paganism of the Semitic world. It only shows the enormous power of these, that they endure, and they cannot be destroyed. Like an alchemist, they can only be made into something else. And the proof of all this is in the esoteric schools, and in particular within the tarot. You look at the picture of the Hanged Man on the Hanged Man card. It is Jesus and it is Odin at the same time. We're also told the story of St. Peter. St. Peter went against Jesus. Well, what did they do with him? They hung him upside down. Maybe St. Peter is an allegory for Second Temple rabbinical Jews who didn't want to accept the Germanization of Christianity. And been saying that they were hung upside down. And also remember, St. Peter is the foundation of the Vatican, the rock on which that church is built. So there you go. I'm almost completely certain at this point, and actually I basically am, that Jesus Christ as we know him today is the god Odin, dovetailed into Second Temple rabbinical Judaism. Everything from the Synoptic Gospels to the Germanic mythology has been altered and changed in order to make this fit and seamlessly dovetail into one another. But the clues are everywhere, from St. Peter rejecting and being an allegory of this rejection of the Germanic thing and then him being hung upside down. Or maybe he was even represents a German, a pagan, and he decided to remain a pagan by being suspended upside down by, like, Odin. But there you go. Odin, Wotan, and Jesus did the same. And it just goes to show you the enormous power of the archetype, that it could endure so long to the point where it still exists as the most powerful religious force on earth. Even into the Hindu world, Jesus Christ is everywhere. Because that's the power of paganism, and that's the power of your ancestry and your ancient ancestors. And I don't care if you're a Christian or a pagan, but if you're a European, your ancestry is not in the Middle East. Your ancestry is here, on the rich, fertile, diverse, spectacular, windswept, sun-baked, wind-blown, rain-washed Europe. And it's time to send a man, in my book, with the sandals and the robe back to the Middle East and return back to our true nature as pagans. It doesn't matter, you can still embrace the Jesus archetype. Just be known that you're embracing Odin. It's as simple as that. So take care. I don't mean to offend anybody's religion or anybody's faith. I'm just telling you, I've looked at this stuff for so long. And, let me tell you, when you know who your real gods are, and your real gods are your own people, they shine much brighter in your heart. Take care.